In the 1960s and early 1970s, American conservatives waged a very strong battle to try to keep sex education instruction out of the curriculum of public and private schools. They opposed such organizations as SIECUS, which was spearheading this drive. At least in those days, Catholic parochial schools were a haven from this kind of instruction which parents rightfully felt could lead to gross impurity. This has all changed. This past November 1990, the U.S. Catholic bishops approved a document which will have formal classroom sex education in the schools. Not only in the schools, but they say this is going to have to be a lifelong education. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. With me today to discuss the bishop's document called Human Sexuality, a Catholic Perspective for Education and Lifelong Learning are three priests who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass exclusively. Father Clarence Kelly, spiritual director of the Daughters of Mary, a congregation of traditional Roman Catholic sisters in Round Top, New York. Father Donald Sanborn, pastor of St. Pius X Church in Warren, Michigan. And Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Parma, Ohio. Reverend Fathers, what is your reaction to this controversial document which has so many parents upset and concerned?
To me, it's strange, first of all, that the bishop should take so much time and issue a 200-page paper on that and neglect the fact that the youth are completely immersed in immorality, sexual immorality. The incidence of premarital sex and pregnancies outside of marriage has, and even among Catholics, has gone up tremendously in the past few decades. And they are apparently not concerned about that at all. Rather, they are introducing this open treatment of sex in the classroom, which is really responsible for the sexual mores of the young people. It's a terrible tragedy. They should be preaching purity and chastity, and they should be teaching them about the commandments of God concerning those things, rather than opening up books and seeing things that would make a sailor blush.
Father Kelly.
I think it represents the third part of their surrender. The modern hierarchy is like an army whose business it is to surrender. I mean, it's absurd, for example, to establish an army so that they can go out on the battlefield for the purpose of surrender. But that is what the hierarchy is. The hierarchy is supposed to go out there and spearhead the fight for truth, for morality, and for true worship. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to go out and preach the gospel to the whole world. The commission that our Lord gave to the apostles on the day he ascended into heaven was that: go into the whole world and preach the gospel to every creature. The hierarchy, and most especially because we're familiar with it, the hierarchy in this country, they have instead done this. On the question of Catholic truth, they have absolutely surrendered. They have given up any claim to represent the truth revealed by Jesus Christ and taught by his church down through the centuries. They have absolutely surrendered on the question of worship. They have thrown away the ancient Mass, the unbloody renewal of the sacrifice of Calvary. They've thrown it into the garbage can. They have substituted a cheap and comical imitation of a Protestant worship service, devoid of any sense of reverence. The Anglicans have more reverence. The Lutherans and the Presbyterians have more reverence. They've taken a cheap, comical imitation of a Protestant service and they've put it in the place of worship. So they threw out Catholic truth, they threw out Catholic worship, and now they're in the process of throwing out Catholic morality. They have surrendered on two fronts. This represents the ultimate surrender on the third front of morality. They are Me Too-ism infected. All they want to do is to appear to the world to represent something. They represent nothing. And so now this business with the sex education is they're trying to show the world, you know, how hip they are, how with it they are, how much in tune they are with modern thinking. But that is what it is in my estimation.
Father Jenkins.
Well, I agree with Father Kelly. They seem to neglect absolutely the idea of eternal life. They neglect absolutely the idea of a soul, sin, redeemed by Christ. And redeemed from what? Redeemed from sin. And to a great extent, the sins of impurity. You know, Our Lady said at Fatima to the little children there, she was talking to children of 11 years old, 7 years old, and 6 years old, that more souls go to hell because of sins of the flesh than for any other reason. And she opened up hell and showed them what hell was like, and gave them a real horror of sin. Is that what these men are going to be doing? I don't think so. They're going to be throwing this thing wide open to lifelong sex education to the people, and you know what it's going to be like, because we've seen everything they've done so far. We've seen how it has actually been translated into action. And what are these kids going to be learning about? They're going to be learning about whatever their so-called Catholic or not even that teachers are going to be teaching them. They're going to have texts written that are going to pander all of the immorality of the day, and they might throw a few nice phrases out about you know, self-restraint and self-discipline and waiting till marriage and so on. But that's not the essence of what they're saying, and they do not couch it in any spiritual terms. Even when they recommend self-discipline and self-restraint in sexual matters, they only give you purely natural reasons for doing it. But the idea that this is forbidden by God, that this is a sin, that you could be damned to hell for doing it, the idea that this offends God who loves you very much, the idea of the scandal that it causes and the spiritual harm to souls, that it totally escapes them. It's as though it's irrelevant to them, the supernatural, spiritual side of it. These are very worldly men who are just saturated with naturalism.
You know, there's a very interesting encyclical, and if we consider it for a moment, I think people will really start making a connection between what's happening now and what the Church has always taught. Pope Pius XI wrote this encyclical called The Christian Education of Youth, and he formally condemned sex instruction in the classroom. He said this: "Far too common is the error of those who, with dangerous assurance and under an ugly term, propagate a so-called sex education, falsely imagining they can arm youth against the dangers of sensuality by means purely natural," as you were saying, "such as a foolhardy initiation and precautionary instruction for all indiscriminately, even in public, and worse still, by exposing them at an early age to the occasions in order to accustom them," so it is argued, "and as it were to harden them against such dangers. Such persons grievously err in refusing to recognize the inborn weakness of human nature and the law of which the Apostle speaks, fighting against the law of the mind, and also in ignoring the experience of facts from which it is clear that particularly in young people, evil practices are the effect not so much of ignorance of intellect as of weakness of a will exposed to dangerous occasions and unsupported by the means of grace."
You know, James, there's no respect for innocence anymore. The littlest children are exposed to all kinds of loose talk, you know, loose terms. Vulgarity, but not only that. I mean, they see everything. And people just presume, adults just presume, well, they're too young, they don't understand what's going on. They do understand what's going on. And if you present an idea, an impure idea into a child's mind, that idea is very firmly embedded in that child's mind, and he doesn't have the maturity to handle it, and perhaps these days not you know, the spiritual faith either, to deal with it. And that works on him and can corrupt that child very easily. There's no respect for innocence.
I think it should be pointed out, too, that the Church is not against the education of children in these matters, but the Church has always said it should be done by the parents in a very private way, and always in conjunction with the morality of the Catholic Church, the commandments, and giving the children the equipment that they need to combat the movements that they will have toward immorality. The Church was always against doing these things in public because these things are by nature intimate and private. They are not public things. It is only since the immoralities of human beings have been aired on TV and in movies and without any shame that it has become a public thing. Frankly, I mean, I don't think kids need sex education. They know more about it probably than their parents do. What these children need and what they're desperate for is the education in morality. They need to be told about the commandments of God. They need to be told about chastity and purity and the lives that the saints led in these things and the battles that saints put up against impurity. This is what they need to hear, and that's what that document should be about. And it should be an instruction to parents in how to tell their children and to protect their children from the immorality of the day, the grossest impurities that just boggle the mind. This is a world that is just obsessed with sex, just obsessed. And for them to be saying, well, we need more sex, and we need it in the classroom, and we need it from kindergarten all the way till the day you die. I mean, my gosh, how much of it are we going to have?
You know, this is perhaps the most striking example that I saw. They had a news conference with these bishops, and one reporter asked the bishops, how do you react to the fact that Pope Pius XI, in his encyclical, The Christian of Education of Youth, explicitly condemned formal classroom sex education? You know, the bishops always like to say, you can't go to the traditional Mass, you have to obey. But they don't want to obey, so they say, well, that was in a different time. What's your reaction to that?
It's typical of the whole attitude of the modern church, that they have absolutely no regard at all for the teaching of the Catholic Church, the authority of the teaching church. And just as they have done away with the teaching that the Catholic Church is the one true church, just as Father Kelly says, they've taken the Catholic Mass and thrown it into the garbage can, and just as they have abandoned Catholic truth and everything else, so also they are unabashed to say, well, it doesn't matter, that's just for that time. The very glory of the Catholic Church is the fact that it is timeless, and that what is said in the 3rd century is true in the 20th, and what is said in the 20th was also true in the 12th century. That it is a timeless, divine institution. That is its very glory. And for them to make a comment like that eats into the substance of the Catholic Church.
I would go one step further without trying to be overly dramatic about it. I would say these bishops are wolves. These bishops are agents of Lucifer in the ruination of souls. The purpose of their commission is to get souls to heaven, to represent our Lord Jesus Christ and His truth on earth, to communicate the truth to souls, to give to them the means necessary to obey God's law. That's their job. Their job is to help young people to be pure in a world that is steeped in filth and immorality. And what these bishops are doing is they are scandalizing the young. And I would say to these bishops, it would be better for them if somebody took a millstone and tied it around their necks and threw them into the sea. Because if they go through with this, they will fall into the hands of the living God, and they will be rewarded with eternal punishment for what they're doing.
You're watching What Catholics Believe. We're discussing the sex ed. Finally, I'd like to read a little bit of a letter which we received from a professor of music in Missouri in response to our program Rock, Rap, and Drugs. He wrote as follows: I wish to thank you for the very excellent program on rock music presented on Channel 17 here in Springfield, Missouri on November 12, 1990. In my opinion, the arts have engendered the greatest moral, spiritual, and ethical revolution in the history of Western civilization. That this is satanically inspired is an a priori assumption. Your exposition of the evils of rock music must not go unnoticed by this country, by the church, and by active members of all churches who promulgate this type of music, especially those who use Christian words yet keep the music of rock as the stylistic basis of their songs. Since Vatican II, The Roman Catholic Church has been wide open to all types of evil musical influences. In letting more air into the Church, the Council has allowed society's value system to take the place of our traditional theism. Church music since 1965 has led the way. I'd like to tell you, too, if you need locations of traditional Latin Mass centers, our operators can help you there as well. Reverend Fathers, returning to this question, it's to me striking not so much what the document said and what the bishops said as opposed to what it didn't say. I recently saw an article in the Plain Dealer, a Cleveland newspaper, which dealt with birth control devices and an unbelievable proliferation. It sounded like something absolutely out of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. These devices are spread everywhere. They're available now in supermarkets. The most brazen and impure ads are concocted, which are trying to make them attractive, as if flouting God in his face, you know, with this kind of immorality. And I don't hear a peep out of these bishops saying anything about this, where, for instance, in Israel, they would not tolerate such ads. Here, the Catholic bishops, largest denomination in the United States, they don't say a thing. What are we to make of this?
I think your frustration and my frustration, and perhaps the frustration of most people who look at these men who wear Roman collars and who are supposed to represent Jesus Christ, our frustration stems from the fact that we still have a tendency to look upon them as being Catholic bishops. And if you consider them to be Catholic bishops and they're not functioning like Catholic bishops, you get upset. I think you have to come to terms, we have to come to terms with the fact that they are not Catholic bishops, they are not Catholic. They do not represent the Roman Catholic Church, and they do not represent our Lord Jesus Christ and the teachings of the popes down through the ages. It's just something we have to come to terms with.
You know, there was a poll, for my next question, there was a poll conducted before the recent gubernatorial elections in Ohio. And one of the candidates was a Catholic who suddenly switched his anti-abortion position to a so-called pro-choice, or more appropriately, pro-death position, as a means of a rather, I mean, that was perceived to be blatant political opportunism and pandering to certain pressure groups. Well, he lost the election, but what was important was this. A poll was conducted, and it revealed that only 7% of Ohioans were opposed to abortion against any circumstance whatsoever. So that must lead you to conclude that a very high percentage of Catholics favor abortion. An even higher percentage of them favor artificial birth control. Why does the Church forbid artificial birth control? And why are they so ineffective, apparently, at conveying this belief to the faithful?
The Church condemns it because God has revealed that it is evil. First of all, by the striking dead of Onan in the Old Testament, who practiced birth control. The Church also condemns artificial birth control because it is against the natural law, and the Catholic Church preaches automatically, and as part of its teaching, the natural law, which is written in the hearts of men, as St. Paul says. And everything that pertains to the natural law pertains to the teaching of the Catholic Church, as its solemn teaching. And it is therefore something that the Church cannot negotiate or cannot do away with. It is something that it has consistently taught, that artificial birth control is intrinsically evil. The reason why these bishops are not concerned about it is, in my opinion, the fact that they have lost the Catholic faith. They don't believe what the Catholic Church teaches. I think that they believe that artificial birth control is okay. They certainly believe in the primacy of the human conscience over the teaching of the Church. That is the way artificial birth control has become prevalent among Catholics. In the confessional or in private counseling, where the priest will say, oh yes, the Church condemns it, but use your conscience. As if the condemnation on the part of the Church was a meaningless thing or a negotiable guideline to your conscience. But, you know, if your conscience feels differently about it, that you have the right to adhere to that, and you have the right to practice artificial birth control. This was universally done. And now the whole so-called Catholic Church, I would call the Vatican II religion or whatever you want, the modernist church, virtually all of them believe in artificial birth control. As a matter of fact, now that the bishops have done this and have communicated this primacy of the conscience over the teaching of the Church, I saw in a newspaper article that one bishop said, oh, we should be listening to the people. They're telling us that artificial birth control is okay. Well, why do the people think that it's okay, except that the bishops and the priests taught them that it was okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, they don't believe anything. They don't believe in the Catholic faith. They don't.
There's an emptiness there. There's a lack of conviction about real things. There's a vacuum. It's like an empty cave. They have to fill it with something, and so they try to fill it with, you know, they're against the war,
fertilizer,
or you know, they're against, yeah, they're in favor of the earth, you know, this wonderful earth, and the sins against the earth must be restrained. And now what are they doing? They're simply mouthing the absurdities of Freud. They do not understand that the human heart was made for God. And what the world is doing is they are sublimating this desire of the human heart for God in all of these other things. When people seek to fulfill all of the longings of their heart in this pleasure and that pleasure and this pleasure, that's a sublimation. They are avoiding the central issue. The central issue is the heart was made for God. Freud put it the other way. Freud would have us believe that our search for God is a manifestation of another drive. And that, in effect, is what the bishops have succumbed to. They don't understand why they're here. They don't understand God, and they don't understand the human heart.
Another question, even going beyond merely the Catholic circles, we've seen in the Old Testament where God would punish various nations for crimes of impurity such as Sodom and Gomorrah. What must be in store for us if, for instance, with these birth control devices are passed out like candy, morality has no meaning anymore?
I think we're really approaching or in Sodom and Gomorrah. I really do. There were very, very terrible excesses in the Old Testament that we read, even religion that had prostitutes for priestesses and all. I think that if we are not already there to the level of shamelessness, of impurity, that we're about to be there very soon. There is such a hard heart with regard to impurity today, and the young people especially, and even middle-aged and sometimes old people, practice it without the slightest reluctance, and do things that turn the stomach, that are actually nauseating from the point of view of animalistic behavior. That I think we are really there at Sodom and Gomorrah, and I really fear for this race. I mean, how God's only choice is to destroy it, or at least the greater part of it. I really fear that we are going to be visited by something awful. Mm-hmm.
You know, we pretty much established that there's a vacuum of instruction from the so-called Catholic bishops, but I'm sure that the people would like to have some guidance. What could you offer today's Catholic or today's sincere non-Catholic who's searching for God from the bottom of his heart? What would you tell them to do when they're faced with this?
Well, we come back to that same question, which I suppose really and truly is at the basis of all of these programs that we're doing, and that is, what is the truth revealed by Jesus Christ? What means did he give to us by which we may have eternal happiness? And the truth revealed by Jesus Christ is the truth contained in the deposit of revelation taught by the Church down through the centuries. The moral teaching as expounded by the Church. It's clear, it's explicit, it's relatively easy to find out what it is, and the means by which we would adhere to it and fulfill the commands of the law, which would be the sacraments, the true Mass and the true sacraments. So what would we say? We would say, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. You must accept that Christ is the eternal Son of God, that there is salvation only through his precious blood, that salvation comes to us through accepting the truth he revealed and living with the aid of the sacraments and the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So you must accept the truth, you must obey the commandments of God, and you must worship as God has dictated that we worship. That is not found in churches that have signs outside today calling themselves Catholic. It is not found there. They must go where the true Mass is, where true doctrine is taught, and where the true moral teaching of the Church is adhered to.
Father Jenkins, very brief question, we have to close. What would you tell parents whose children are going to be going to these schools where the bishops will now impose this new curriculum?
I would tell them to fulfill the prediction of certain people, even Bishop Vaughn up in New York, predicted that if the bishops approve this document and follow through on it in their so-called Catholic schools, the parents are going to pull their children out. And I think that's exactly what the parents have to do. The parents should pull their children out already on any number of reasons, for any number of reasons, but this is just the icing on the cake. Their children have to be given a spirit of purity and a spirit of real innocence. And this is going to be corrupted. Father Samuel was so right. Where did the children go anymore to get away from this? The whole world is saturated with it. They can't even go into a Catholic classroom now and escape this drumming on them about sexuality. The children need a haven. They need a haven of innocence and purity. And that should be their homes, and it should certainly be the schools, which are nothing but the extensions of the homes.
Fathers, thank you for a fascinating half hour. We need